that who I think it is? Mitch Northam in the house. This is the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things women's basketball, whether that be WNBA, college hoops, a little international flavor today, and much, much more. Yes, that is SB Nation's Mitchell Northam. He is back after a well-deserved 3-week hiatus because of vacation, as well as some NBA draft coverage. Very excited to maybe tap into that a little bit. I am Mia O'Brien. We are excited to bring you this early July, approaching the WNBA All-Star Game. We have all of the beef, all of the smoke edition of the Women's Basketball Podcast on OG Triangle Media. Hi, Mitch. I feel like it's been 10 years. How are you, friend?
I'm good. I got a little tan. I got some sun. I've been to Maryland. I've been to Charleston. I've been to New York City. I've been very busy, but it's been fun. And now I'm back home in an undisclosed location in North Carolina's Research Triangle and ready to talk about some women's hoops.
You did not go to West Virginia, for those of you watching on YouTube.
No.
Mitch is sporting a West Virginia hat of some kind, though. And we're always here for the various hats that Mitch both figuratively and literally is wearing.
Yeah, this is a West Virginia Black Bears hat. I don't know if they're still a team. They used to be a minor league team. Maybe they still are. But they played in Morgantown. And my grandfather used to live in West Virginia. My uncle still does. And visiting one summer and went and saw a game and thought this hat looked cool. So I bought it.
I love it. That's the same reason I bought this shirt. Also because it was the game special shirt in the team store for the Indiana Fever. We will dive into my trip to Indianapolis, what I saw at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. We'll dive into what Mitch has been covering at SB Nation, as well as his time at the NBA draft in New York City. But we begin, as we do each and every week on the Women's Basketball Podcast, with our Her of the Week. Producer Dimitri, I'm going to need in post you to cue up the world's smallest violin, but I don't say that to belittle the efforts of our queen, Red Panda. Violin cues. In case you missed it, Red Panda, the popular, the legendary halftime entertainment at basketball games at the collegiate and professional level, took a tumble at the Commissioner's Cup final in Minneapolis last week, injured her wrist. Expectation is she should be ready to go for the college season. Mitch, what are your thoughts on Red Panda? Is she the greatest halftime entertainment of all time of sports in the United States?
Sure. I don't have
I did see an interesting halftime entertainer in Indianapolis, so I'm going to have to bring that up, but continue.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion about Red Panda. I have seen her in person a handful of times, and the first couple of times I was very impressed. But it's kind of like, I have a big disagreement with my wife about this, but I say this about fireworks. If you've seen one fireworks show, you've kind of seen them all. And so after seeing Red Panda is cool to see once or twice. And then I get it. It's fine. It's very impressive. What she does is incredible. But maybe what if we change the routine? I think that, I don't want Red Panda to get injured, and it's very unfortunate that happened. But I think the Red Panda does deserve a break. And maybe, just maybe, we don't have to roll her out for every sporting event. Like, it felt kind of underwhelming to have her at like the NBA finals. Wasn't she there for one of the games?
She was, yes.
Just considering like this is someone who just shows up to like a Thursday night game in Chapel Hill sometimes.
Or even Iowa City or Ames, Iowa, for that matter, or Gainesville.
Or like, the quarterfinals of the SEC women's basketball tournament, and like, oh, now she's doing Game 7 of the WNBA or the NBA Finals. Like, it just kind of feels a little, okay, maybe we don't have to have her at everything. She deserves a break, and I hope she gets some good rest.
I know I said I didn't want to be on the show tonight, but Mitch knows this because we had a private text about this. I hate Red Panda. I don't think it's impressive. I don't think it's interesting. I think it is garbage. I think it is the opposite of entertainment. And to echo what Mitch said, I'm not glad she got hurt, but can we all stop pretending we think this is fucking awesome?
Okay, so Dimitri, hang there, because I have to ask you, did you see my video that I posted from Gainbridge Fieldhouse? And it's a popular WNBA halftime entertainment, evidently. The guy who stacks the chairs while he's climbing the chairs.
I've seen this, yes.
I apologize, Chairmaster, that I don't know your name or what your official title is.
That's a good name for it.
The Chairmaster. Do you like the chair? But the Chairmaster you like?
Yeah. I mean, it's more entertaining than Red Panda.
Red Panda's on a unicycle.
Yeah, I mean, she's been on a unicycle for a while. I will say this. The chair stacking was, and I wonder if this is true of Red Panda's act as well. I don't know. The chair stacking used to be a very common thing in circuses. Like that used to be a very common act. So I do feel like all of these people, like you decide you're going to be a halftime entertainer and there's just a catalog you have to pick your act out of.
Yeah. Sometimes at Duke women's basketball games, they'll bring like the local gymnastics club there. Right. And like, I find that kind of entertaining. Like sometimes it's like, whoa, like that, 14-year-old girl can do whatever that is that I could never dream of doing. Or there was one time at a UNC game where they brought in like, they quickly set up these ramps and just had like dudes on BMX bikes. And like, that was kind of cool.
Sure.
But I just like, I've seen Red Panda like 15 times now, like just in covering games.
But that
first time, it was cool.
Give me mascots that used to be members of men's college gymnastics team hitting a trampoline and dunking 8 days of the week. That's all basketball needs for a halftime show. Or here's an alternative for you: open mic night. Anybody in the crowd that has something interesting, come on down.
It's very dangerous because I know she's listening. Rebecca Kopelman, your dad 100% would have seized that moment. So I'm kind of glad that we had the Stairmaster. Shout out Alan, and we did not have open mic. Thank you, Dimitri. But yes. I still have to give Red Panda her.
Listen, I'm glad as someone that has
we're happy she's okay.
Yeah. As someone that has done that, like I've gone flying over the handlebars of my bike and broken everything. I'm glad she's going to be okay because that could be so much worse. But yeah, screw her. The act is stupid.
Her of the week, Red Panda. Although we do have an honorary Her of the week before we get to this week's starting five, Mitch. We did want to give flowers as well to the 3 rookies who made the WNBA All-Star Game. It's the most rookies to make the All-Star Game since 2011. Paige Beckers, Kiki Iriafen, and Sonia Citron. Before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room. Whether or not there were snubs for the WNBA All-Star Game. What say you, Mitch? Are you happy with all 3 of these rookies getting this opportunity? Because there's been a lot of flack in the streets that Paige Beckers was voted in by the fans largely. Not that a coach's decision didn't factor into it. And the idea of Sonia Citron and Kiki Iriafen making the All-Star Game, and yet Brittany Sykes, their running mate in the starting 5 for the Washington Mystics, who has had, as we've discussed on this podcast, a renaissance in D.C. this past season, not getting the call to head to Indianapolis in less than 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I think Sonia Citron was deserving of a spot. I think she's been, next to Paige Beckers, in my opinion, the most impressive rookie that we've had this season. But I would concede that, like, among the snubs, I think Kayla McBride and Brittany Sykes were probably the most egregious and the most glaring. I mean, Brittany Sykes is putting up pretty incredible numbers this season, and Kayla McBride is also having a great season. And she was, you could say, like the clear number 2 on the Lynx last year, and like she's basically putting up identical numbers and doing some really great stuff for them this year. Yeah, it's tough because I don't really know like who I would cut. Like, there's nobody, I think, on the All-Star team that I'm like, oh, they don't deserve a spot, or, whatever it might be. So yeah, it's tough, but I would say that yeah, Brittany Sykes and now I'm having a brain fart. Kayla McBride, are the 2 like glaring snubs to me.
I would add Azurá Stevens into the conversation after seeing her in person on Saturday. We'll dive into that one and during last call because I have a whole heck of a lot to report back from Indianapolis, and we got to get to this week's starting 5. Mitch, you are going to kick us off. We're going to take a brief foray away from the W to the world of international basketball. And while I know that you are leading the starting 5 with your Kara Lawson futures bet that you placed on this very podcast, is Flau'jae Johnson going to be referenced in number 1 in this week's starting 5? Because I thought her Instagram post was hilarious.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I don't really understand like the claim that she might be trying to make, or maybe fans are reading too much into it and maybe implying something that she is not. But like there were guards on that team that were just playing better than her. Like I don't think she has a legitimate gripe like that she was not getting playing time over Hannah Hidalgo, Olivia Miles, or Michaela Blake's. Like all of those players were playing better than her. For the listeners, we're talking about the FIBA AmeriCup, which just wrapped up. This is a tournament that is held every couple of years. If you win it gets you an automatic spot in the FIBA World Cup, which is going to be held next summer, which is basically a qualifying event for the Olympics. And, you know, the Americans have won that many times in a row. It's in Berlin, Germany next summer. So the AmeriCup was just held in Santiago, Chile. Typically, while most other teams, maybe save for except Canada, send like their senior national team to this event, like with real veterans and older players and whatnot. The Americans almost always send a college team because the WNBA doesn't take a break for the AmeriCup. But TeamUSA went in there and dominated. They went 7-0. They beat Brazil for the title to win the gold. Michaela Blake's was the tournament MVP. So she's primed for another year again. We'll get back to Vanderbilt here in a second, in a couple beats. But yeah, I just wanted to come on here and take a victory lap because I still believe in my theory that Carol Lawson is going to be the next head coach of the senior national team when the FIBA World Cup rolls around next year and when the Olympics roll around in 2028 in Los Angeles. Carol Lawson was the head coach of this team at the AmeriCup, and then they were awesome. And like I mentioned, they went 7-0. And yeah, I just think kind of everything is leading to Carol Lawson being the leader of this national team. You know, Sue Bird is now the technical director, managing director of the team. So she gets to hire the new head coach. Sue Bird and Carol Lawson played together on an Olympic team in
Pretty
2008.
Tight. Yep.
I also, when I went to Minnesota in May, I asked Cheryl Reeve, do you want to keep coaching TeamUSA, in a story that I wrote for SB Nation, and she dodged the question. It basically was just like, yeah, you know, I just talked to Sue and congratulated her, and that was the extent of our conversation. Okay, cool. I mean, but history has shown us in that story I kind of laid out, it's pretty rare for a coach of the women's national basketball team in the U.S. to coach in multiple Olympics. Basically, the only person who has done it has been Gino Auriemma. And so, you know, Dawn was one and done. I think all signs are pointing to Cheryl Reeve being one and done. Pat Summitt was one and done. You know, Kay Yao one and done. I mean, all these coaches, you go on and on down the line. Tara Vanderveer one and done. Nell Fortner 1-1. Nell Fortner now the coach of the Canadian national team, which won the bronze. So yeah, I just think everything is lining up for Carol Lawson. As I previously mentioned, USA Basketball is a very political organization. Carol Lawson is very connected in this organization. She has won a gold medal as a player, as the head coach of 3-on-3, and as an assistant coach on that 2024 team. I think she has long been groomed for this position. Also, Nina King now on whatever board it is for USA Basketball. Also, she works at Duke. Also, Mike Krzyzewski coached the men's Olympic team for a long time. Everything is lining up for Carol Lawson to be standing on the sidelines in Berlin, Germany next year, and in Los Angeles in 2028. And I just want to say that we called this on the first episode of this podcast last November.
I think you know what time it is, Mitch. Do you know what for our YouTube audience? It's time. Brian Windhorst meme.
Indeed.
That Duke reference was elite. I would also like to note on today's rundown, I wrote Michaela Barnes. I don't know what Barnes I had on the brain and not Michaela Blake's, but thank you, Mitch, for the catch. I would also like to note before we move to number 2 in this week's starting 5 and circle back to the WNBA, I would like to note that some of the official photos from the victory celebration picturing Olivia Miles, Hannah Hidalgo, side by side. I am shocked I didn't see more beef in the streets, Mitch, but maybe that's because we have a lot of other beef going on in the world of women's basketball, which we're going to get to. But real quick, what did you make of, to your point, Flau'jae Johnson, 22 points in the quarterfinal victory, then 2 points the next time? Like, it's a treasure trove of riches, to be clear, that Kara Lawson had at her disposal with this roster. The fact that Hannah Stolke could go, 7 points, 7 boards. Audi Crooks can drop 10 one night, 4 in 7 minutes the next night. Like, to be clear, there has to be a rotation because there's so many pieces. But what do you make of the pecking order, and that it was actually the now rising sophomore at Vanderbilt who stepped up the biggest of anyone?
Yeah, I think to me it was very it was kind of classic Kara Lawson coaching, like we've seen now at Duke over the past couple of years. Like, she likes to have a pretty deep rotation. Like, she likes to play 8, 9, 10 players. And most of the time, like, she doesn't really have many players playing like 30 minutes or more a game. Like, she's kind of keeping everybody, your starting five, like around 20, 25 minutes. So yeah, like that was sort of something I expected, just because like that's how she's operated at Duke. And now with this sort of all-star team that you have in Chile, like you have even more and more talent that you can so you can really kind of play the matchups. And I think maybe in that gold medal game, she just thought that Flau'jae wasn't matchup. Maybe it just wasn't going to work out. But yeah, Michaela Blakes, I mean, she looks like she is really ready for a sophomore encore. Hannah Hidalgo was also great in this tournament, and Olivia Miles was too. I mean, both of them were filling up the stat sheets. Olivia had a couple highlights, with some handles and with some assists and stuff. And yeah, I mean, those three players I think really stood out. Joyce Edwards too was really, really good in this tournament. I think she was the only player, if I read correctly, that started every single game for the Americans in Chile. So, yeah, could be a big year for her at South Carolina as well.
And we navigated the beef, a potential drama between Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo. Good job, Team USA. And as I noted on last week's episode, which you should go check out with former DePaul assistant Kevin Schwartz, in case you haven't listened to it, he sat in for Mitch. If you haven't seen the video of Flau'jae and Audi Crooks singing in harmony as Audi Crooks plays the piano, please go watch it.
That was excellent. Yeah.
I'm obsessed with it. I didn't know Audi Crooks could just play the piano like that. Let's keep it moving. We have a whole heck of a lot still to get to in this week's starting five, let alone today's episode. Oh, that's right. So we recorded last week's episode, the aforementioned episode with Kevin Schwartz, on a Monday. And on Tuesday, despite the fact that in Making Money with Mitch and Mia, ... I selected the links to cover a 5.5 point spread. Kevin sat here on the podcast and said, that's a slam dunk. There's no question. And then what happened, Mitch? Are they back? Are they not back? Because then I also watched them lose to the LA Sparks 4 days later, 5 days later, whatever it was. Like, I still cannot figure out the Indiana Fever for the life of me.
They are still a mixed bag, but they did win the Commissioner's Cup, which is actually, oddly enough, a good omen for the Lynx, apparently, because the team that has lost the Commissioner's Cup since it has existed has gone on to win the WNBA title. So we'll see if that comes to fruition once again this year. But the CaitlinClark-less Fever, did I get that right? Beat the Lynx for the Commissioner's Cup title, which led to some hilarious post-game Instagram Live. And there was some shotgunning of, I don't know if those were Trulies or beers or what they were in the locker room. But all that was fun. And then, the Fever lost to the Sparks. So I don't know. You were there. What happened?
It was a pretty wire to wire game, to be clear. And then just in the final 2 minutes, it's been the case of the Indiana Fever for the last month and a half. For whatever the reason, they can't close out games. And it's not for lack of defense. I think it's just for lack of clutch shots and letting the opposition hang around a little too long. That's what it felt like. It truly just felt like they never put the Sparks away. And so when Rakia Jackson has that 3-point play with, I think it was like minute 40, or maybe it was with 59 seconds to go. I forget exactly the time. But when she had that 3-point play, you just saw them all look at each other and it was like, oh no, here we go again. And that is where, and we're going to get into this today, that is where I am so interested to see the notion of, well, when CaitlinClark returns, does that affect the flow and the fluidity that this current group has been able to develop without their star player? Or on the flip side, do you actually need her because she is the closer? And when you suddenly are down 1 point with 59 seconds to go and you're all looking around like, all right, what do we do now? That's when CaitlinClark is, in fact, Batman, and you do need her to step up in those clutch moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Fever, I just looked at their schedule. They have not won more than 2 games in a row this season. If you look at their schedule last season, they had a 4-game winning streak in June, and that has not happened this year.
And I think it was they won like 7 of 8 in August, or if not the whole month.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. The consistency there, I think, is a real concern. Obviously, Caitlin's been in and out with injuries and stuff. They've had a little bit of roster turnover. DeWanna Bonner out, Ari McDonald in. It's been, I think, not the season everybody expected so far for the Indiana Fever. But you win the Commissioner's Cup, so all the players get a nice bonus.
Banners fly forever. My poster's over there. Commissioner's Cup champions 2025. Never That's forget. Right. I would also like to note that, and we will at some point get to it, they also sandwiched in between that Commissioner's Cup victory over the Minnesota Lynx and the defeat at the hands of the LA Sparks at home. The Indiana Fever also routed the Las Vegas Aces 81-54. I'm going to get to that a little bit later in the starting 5. So also throw that into the how do we decipher the Fever, but also man, oh man, do the Aces have problems? Back to the college game we go for number 3 in this week's starting 5.
Yeah, I'm going to hit on 2 things in the SEC real quick, both in the state of Tennessee. The first is that, we talked about Michaela Blakes and how she's kind of primed for a great sophomore season. So last year there was only one pair of teammates, Michaela Blakes and her teammate Khamil Pierre, who averaged more than 20 points per game. Now Khamil Pierre is no longer on Vanderbilt's roster.
Is she on a roster, to be clear?
She's not. She's not on any roster yet. So last Monday evening, I guess a week ago today, we got a statement from Shea Ralph, the head coach there at Vanderbilt, saying she is no longer a member of the program. I started texting a lot of sources, a lot of coaches and agents and stuff like that, just to figure out sort of what Khamil Pierre's future is and could be. She would be a junior this upcoming season. She has 2 years of eligibility left. However, we're in a time period in the calendar where the transfer portal is closed. And so, if Khamil Pierre were to transfer to another school, on the surface, everyone assumes that she would have to sit out a year. But there are, I think, a lot of loopholes that could lead her to being eligible to play for another team next year. I was talking to one source who thought that, there's one kind of loophole where basically she could, sort of like any other regular student, simply transfer to a new school and without having any contact with the basketball staff there. And then once she is accepted to and enrolled in that new school, she could potentially be added to the roster as a walk-on and hypothetically be compensated with funds from revenue sharing made possible by the house settlement. So one person thought that was a loophole that potentially she could exploit. There is also now this new transfer portal window. I don't know if you saw Ross Dellinger and a bunch of other people tweet about this. This is seemingly to me a new window made for players for sports that like their roster spot got kind of squeezed out because of the house settlement. And so they don't have a roster spot anymore. And so they're allowed to enter the portal. But then I saw a lot of people tweeted about, now this is like a waiver period for football. I was texting a lot of coaches about this too. And women's basketball coaches are just like unclear what this really means for them because their sport is one that was not affected by the total number of roster spots because of the house settlement. But is this a loophole that Khamil Pierre could exploit? I don't know. I think that if I were betting, just based on kind of the crazy transfer portal stuff and stories we've seen this cycle, from the Gracie Merkel Penn State to Maryland back to Penn State situation to the girl from Youngstown, or should I say woman from Youngstown State, who graduated 10 years ago and entered the transfer portal this spring. I would bet that Khamil Pierre is on a roster and playing at some point next season. Like, I just feel like in this day and age of the NCAA is so afraid to get sued and whatever, like, she's going to find her way on a roster and is probably going to be playing, I think, is what I would put my money on.
And do you believe that will be in the almighty SEC? Do you think that's in the Big Ten? And any idea, or there's no breadcrumbs to follow the trail?
I don't know. I kind of, at the end of that story I wrote for SB Nation, I kind of speculated a little bit. I mean, one team that could really use a player like Khamil Pierre, oddly enough, is NC State. I mean, they really need somebody who can play the four. And as we've talked about before, they have swung and missed on several transfer portal targets this season. But they're a team that has roster spots available. Like, they don't have a full roster right now. So they're a team that I'm sure would love to have Khamil Pierre. I pointed out in that story that Khamil Pierre's high school coach was just hired by BYU as an assistant coach. And if she goes to BYU, she could play with Delaney Gibb, who was a star at the AmeriCup as well for Canada. She, I believe, delivered like the game-winning assist in the bronze medal game. And her AAU coach is now at Pepperdine. So if she wants to go ball in the mid-major ranks, she can do that too. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I think she's going to have to find a loophole or two, but that's not to say that those loopholes don't exist and she couldn't find them. The only other SEC thing I wanted to mention is that our friend Killa Kim is now in the $1 million club. She, in her reworked contract and extension and all that, she now has a total base salary over $1 million annually.
I meant to bring up Killa Kim when we were talking about Kara Lawson, because to your point about the strength in numbers, I don't want to call it hockey shift rotation because I get triggered by what occurred with the Jacksonville Jaguars defense last year, as you guys know. But in that same vein, Kim Caldwell, TeamUSA coach 2030, picks up the baton for Kara Lawson. Who says no? If we're going to talk about strength in numbers and rotating, my vote, Killa Kim. Keep it moving. Speaking of keeping it moving, let's circle back to the WNBA. I alluded to it. I was in the house as the Commissioner's Cup champion Indiana Fever 81, Las Vegas Aces, two-time WNBA champions 54. A'ja Wilson had 29 of those 54 points, perhaps more notably now in their last two games out, including a 20-point victory over the Connecticut Sun on Sunday. Jewell Loyd has 5 points, is 1 of 12 from the floor, Mitch. We discussed this last week on the pod with Kevin Schwartz. We talked about the Kelsey Plum comment about everyone's tired. I don't think this is Jewell Loyd is tired. Having seen it firsthand, and you can write it off as a one-off because unlike against the LA Sparks, the Fever, they truly like put the foot on the gas pedal. They stepped on their throats, for lack of a better term. Please don't take that out of context, folks. The 3-point shooting barrage in the second quarter, in particular from Kelsey Mitchell and company, truly separated the Fever from the Aces. And outside of allowing A'ja Wilson to get hers, there was no fluidity and no continuity. Whatever lineup Becky Hammon ran out onto the floor, as Kevin, my fiance, described it watching here at home. Yes, unfortunately, Kevin did not get to come on the trip because Terrence, the cat, had emergency surgery. Shout out to Terrence. Yeah, I know, right? Real bummer. But Terrence is okay, everyone. Thank you for asking. It's all good. Kevin, not so much. But Kevin described it because I was trying to meet up with friend of the pod, Megan Gustafson, after the game. And Kevin described it on the video broadcast, and I saw it right in front of my eyes, as Becky Hammon looked like she wanted to punt a puppy the entire fourth quarter, if not the entire game. And that was a very good description because I was supposed to meet up with Megan, and I went down near the tunnel, and Becky literally went up to almost every single player on the bench, whether they were active or not, because Megan was still working her way back from her injury. And literally just kept looking at each player and being like, And so Asia was the only one who signed autographs after the game. The rest of them all ran in. The vibes are bad. Again, I know we have said that a time or two on this pod, but truly, I am concerned, not just this season, but long-term, where the play will be for Las Vegas.
I think that the Las Vegas Aces are regretting moving Kelsey Plum and acquiring Jewel Lloyd. And I think they are regretting allowing Kate Martin to leave via expansion. And I think this is just a roster that has not found its way yet. And I think it's a team that expected to come back this year and contend for a title. And, they had won before last year, the previous 2 titles. And then they fall short last year, losing in the semifinals. And you have Asia Wilson and you have Chelsea Gray and you have Jackie Young. And I think that the Aces, Becky Hammon et al., thought that they could just place whatever pieces around those 3 players and make it work. And now I think we are seeing that is not true and that is not the case. And that maybe Kelsey Plum was more important to them than they thought. And maybe Jewel Lloyd is not a good fit. And I don't know what kind of dirt Kaya Stokes has on Becky Hammon. I don't really understand why she keeps getting playing time
because they don't have
team.
anyone else. They waived Liz Kitley. And traded for Nalissa Smith, who's now starting over Kia Stokes. But at the same time, there's still no front court depth. And I wouldn't even classify Megan as being a 5 or a 4 at this point of her career, because she's tried to become more of a 3 or a 4, but they may have to play her at center because I don't know who else they have who can actually contribute offensively from the 5.
Waiving Liz Kitley was baffling to me, not just because like I watched her for 5 years at Virginia Tech in the ACC, and she's one of 3 players ever to win the ACC Player of the Year award 3 times, and she just dominated this league. But because they invested, basically a whole year into her of her to get healthy, last year, and basically kind of had her on ice last season. And now, like, this season, like, to not even really give her, I think, a fair shake in showing what she can do, it was really baffling decision to me. So I think that this organization right now is just all out of sorts and doesn't really have an answer for, like, how to completely turn it around. I'm actually going to see them live later this week up in Washington. Actually, that game is in Fairfax, Virginia at George Mason. So that'll be interesting. But I'm going to see them play the Mystics later this week as I drive up north again. And yeah, I think that they're missing a lot of things. Another player that they had last year who's no longer there is Tiffany Hayes. Mm-hmm. I feel like maybe they thought, like, okay, we'll get Dana Evans and maybe we'll get a little bit more out of Tiffany Mitchell and maybe Aaliyah Nye. I mean, Aaliyah Nye, I think, has
been okay. Yeah,
pretty well for them. Maybe she should play more. I'm not sure. But I think certainly like the 1-for-1 Jewel Lloyd, Kelsey Plum switch out, like that hasn't worked at all. And I'm not sure like what the fix is. Like right now, I just don't see them as like a contender, as like one of the best 4 teams in the league.
I don't even know if they make the playoffs. And if they do, it's like as the 6, 7, or 8 seed. Aaliyah Nye hit a 3 going into the 4th quarter, which at that point, Indiana was like firmly ahead. But as she, it was a crossover move to a 3 on the wing on the right. Like I verbally looked at Rebecca and said, God, she's going to be such a good pro. And so I do hope they play her more. Quickly, because we can't get through a starting 5 without a football analogy. I would like to compare this experiment in Las Vegas to whatever the Pittsburgh Steelers are currently doing. Sorry, I had to do it to you, Mitch. I was having this conversation with someone earlier. It's because it's this idea of and the Steelers is even more confounding, and that's a story for another time. But this idea of, we're in win now mode, so we're going to get all these mercenaries and these players that, while still are like in their prime, they're really not. They're like the final year of their prime, and it's just fast. And Aaron Rodgers is obviously not, but like I would compare it to that. Asia Wilson is obviously firmly in her prime. Chelsea Gray, as I have said on this podcast a time or two, is probably in the final year of her prime. I don't know what Jewel Lloyd and Jackie Young currently are. And so, again, it's this idea of if we get all the stars and we just push them to the middle of the table, all of our chips, we will win. And it's just there's no continuity because, to your point about a Kate Martin or an Aaliyah Nye, if you can't develop those glue players, the non-stars, but who your stars elevate, and then they in turn elevate the star even more because they do all the little things around them, like that's not a team. That's just an all-star team, and this is not a three-point shooting contest.
Yeah, and to your point about the Steelers, if you want to go get the once a great quarterback, but now is washed up guy and a bunch of really good skill players, that's great. But if you have a really, really terrible offensive line, which the Steelers do, that's not going to do much. Yeah, I'm very frustrated about this. I will not be watching a down of Steelers football this year.
I'm really high on Troy Fatanu and Zach Frazier and come on now, Miles McCormick or Mason McCormick, whatever his name is out of South Dakota State.
Sure.
I'm higher on that, but that's a story for another podcast. Let's round out this week's starting five. I mentioned we have a lot of beef. We're going to get to the beef of the week. Our main event is involving some beef. But let's begin with the final note in this week's starting five, which is also from the drama department. Carolyn Peck had to walk back her comments on ESPN over the weekend. Carolyn she walked right past me as I was standing outside the media center, getting ready to say hello to our friends Pat Boylan and John Nolan, the two play-by-play announcers for the Indiana Fever. And I was like, oh, I forgot that Carolyn does color for the Aces as part of their home broadcast crew. And so evidently the next day she went on her other employer, ESPN, and she noted that she thinks that no CaitlinClark, it maybe doesn't make the Fever more dangerous, because then she walked that back. Mitch, what did you make of this controversy? This is probably on the mild to spicy scale of beef this week. This is probably at this point in time in like the mild, maybe medium category. What say you?
I don't know. It was weird because like when she initially said those things, it felt like she was saying them with a lot of conviction, like she believed it. So like it kind of struck me as like you're giving a hot take, but then by walking it back, it shows me you don't actually believe it. And so it was kind of weird. It was a pretty weird situation. I wonder if she just got so much like pushback and stuff from, the Clark stands on Twitter that she just felt like she had to walk it back or had to like clarify or correct herself or whatever. Because I thought that her initial statement was pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
And
just the idea of when you don't have Caitlin on the floor, you have to account for 5 different people. Whereas if Caitlin's on the floor, then you're like, okay, well, she's number 1 in the scouting report, and then we'll figure out everyone else from there.
I think she maybe didn't say it in the way. I think that's what she ultimately meant, that like the scouting report is harder to read when CaitlinClark is out, because when CaitlinClark is in, the scouting report is CaitlinClark.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And so this was the tweet that she said. I did not say CaitlinClark is not valuable. She's a great player. For those who only see Caitlin, I was complimenting the rest of the team. The Fever have several weapons. Yes, they lost last night. They have lost games with her. Respect to the whole team. As a coach, if you have ever prepared a scouting report, scout the Fever with and without Caitlin. What do you have to take away in both scenarios? They are different. One is not easier than the other. It's just different. There is a lot of talent on that team. Well, she did say that one was better than the other, but that's neither here nor there. That's okay. We appreciate Carolyn just putting it out there into the ether. We're gonna get to you, Caitlin Stans. Don't worry. This is our official beef of the week, and it's just because we stand PheeCollier here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. We made her our Her of the Week a few weeks ago. Mitch, do you have the tweet in front of you? The comments from Phee on the 4th of July, no less, regarding if there is some sort of conspiracy theory between Unrivaled and the W, Brianna Stewart and PheeCollier, the two co-founders of Unrivaled.
I do. So the original tweet is from some anonymous user, Pretty Girl 2004. Sure, shout out to her.
Cool.
And she said, so let me get this straight. Brianna Stewart is the WNBA president. PheeCollier is VP. They co-founded Unrivaled, a league that benefits if there's a WNBA lockout. And they're the ones leading CBA negotiations. How do you negotiate in good faith? Make it make sense. To which PheeCollier replied, also, I would like to know Brianna Stewart is a vice president.
I was going to say, yes, thank you.
So PheeCollier quote tweeted this and said, "Let me get this straight. While everyone else was enjoying fireworks, you were thinking about how me and Stewie, of all people, are conspiring to force a lockout that would result in less money year-round for WNBA players," with a lot of laughing emojis. So yeah, that's where this all started.
I just we're bored online, and I don't understand why. There's a lot of good basketball being played. Yes, the CBA negotiations are going to take center court, if you may, in the next 2 weeks at the All-Star game weekend in Indianapolis. Certainly the comments from Satu Sabali earlier this week that the current negotiations up to this point and suggestions have been a slap in the face. Yeah, like it's going to get ugly. They have until October to figure this out. Why are we angsting on July 4th about this? Like it's going to get done.
I understand where this fan is coming from, because it's not the first time I've heard this sort of concern.
Oh, okay, interesting.
About PheeCollier and Brianna Stewart having these high-profile roles in the Players Association while also owning another league. However, like I do agree with PheeCollier. Like, I don't think it really benefits Unrivaled to have a lockout. Like, Unrivaled plays on a different calendar, and as we saw last year, like a lot of the best players in the league are already going to play Unrivaled, like regardless of whether they're getting a WNBA paycheck or not. There was a couple of exceptions, of course, but I don't see like where the big conspiracy sort of theory is. Like, I understand the concern. Like, on paper, it might look a little weird and messy. But again, like, I just don't think it really benefits Unrivaled or PheeCollier or Brianna Stewart to have a lockout. The other thing, like, I'm thinking about CBA negotiations now. There was a column at The Athletic this week, I think, or last week, that I think Chantel Jennings wrote, who was great. And it was kind of an opinion piece. It was mostly about how, now is the time to lower the age limit for the WNBA draft. And how that might happen, through CBA negotiation. I would push back a little bit and just say, I don't see why either side of the negotiating table on the CBA, you're talking about the players, the current players in the WNBA, or the owners. I don't see why either one of them would push for lowering the age limit. Even as we have more roster spots available coming with the expansion draft coming. Like, if you're in the Players Association, that means you're in the WNBA. So, if you're advocating for lowering the age limit, that means there is going to now be a larger pool of players available to be drafted. And in so means there's going to be a larger pool of players looking to take your job. At a cheaper salary. If you're the owners, I don't really see the upside either. I mean, you're just talking about tasking your already probably overworked, underpaid coaching staff with more and more scouting. I think the way that this happens, if the age limit ever gets lowered, is you will have to have a high-profile player like a Juju Watkins sue the WNBA over this. I think that's what.
Which, by the way, asterisk, as we've said on this podcast, and I know officially, and it's the pros versus college, the Indiana Pacers came out today as we're recording this, and they said Tyrese Halliburton's out for the year. I don't believe USC is going to ever come out and say that with regards to Juju Watkins. But I just don't see a world in which she plays this year after tearing her ACL in March. And in turn, Mitch, I believe first off, legally, she has to come back for her senior year because of her birth date. But even if this rule was to be passed, I don't think she goes right to the W.
No, I mean, and the other thing is, like, all right, so, like, why do most NBA and NFL players leave college early? It's because the money is too good to say no to. And the money is just not at that point yet in the WNBA where, like, it's this, like, thing that you can't refuse and say no to. I mean, if you're a first or second or third round pick in any one of those leagues, like, you pretty much become a millionaire right away. It doesn't work that way in the WNBA. And now with the house settlement and even some of these already high profile players getting NIL and stuff, like, I don't think the enticement to go early is quite like at that level. I mean, we just saw Flajay Johnson and Olivia Miles say, thanks, no thanks. We're going to do another year of college. So, like, you know, I just don't see that happening anytime soon.
If you're looking for more on the W's expansion to 3 new locales, be sure, once again, to go check out last week's episode. A lot of great stuff with Kevin Schwartz. We also dove headfirst into what it is like being a coach in the NIL era. Mitch, I know you listened, but still can't believe, and I've still been quoting Kevin from last week, a 2-star in the portal asking for $200K. Like, not a 2-star, sorry. That was mean. Not a 2-star. Someone who averaged 2 points per game asking for $200K in the
portal. Yeah. It's, I mean, when the coaches say the Wild Wild West, like they're being a little hyperbolic, but not that much. Like it's kind of crazy.
There's no way to put the toothpaste back in. Before we get to this week's main event, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at the Sports Podcast Festival. Yes, the BOGO sale, my Publix family, is still going on. Shout out Publix. Shout out the Sports Podcast Festival. You can get a buy one, get one half off ticket by using code SPF25, whether you order your tickets at eTix or therialto.com. The second annual Sports Podcast Festival is August 23rd at the Rialto Theater in Raleigh, North Carolina. Mitch, remind the folks, too, who's going to be at the Sports Podcast Festival. And there's also a night before party. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, so I believe that the night before party is going to be our friends at Hand of the Dirt and Matt Brown of the Extra Points podcast. And then, the Sports Podcast Festival is going to feature Split Zone Duo, our friends Alex Kirshner, Richard Johnson, Stephen Godfrey, talking about college football. Ovius and Giglio locally here in the Triangle, and then Big Screen Sports with my friend Caroline Darney. It's going to be an awesome time. I was there last year. Super, super fun. Just kind of getting to hang out with everybody in that space at the Rialto. Lots of good food, lots of good drinks. Just a really fun day and fun way to spend week 0.
Maybe Mia might even make an appearance. Now you got to go get your tickets, and you've got to use promo code SPF25. The Sports Podcast Festival returns to the Rialto on August 23rd. Mitch, it is time for the main event. And we got to let the folks know. We were workshopping this one a little bit, and I got to give a shout out to producer Dimitri. He was like, look, this is the biggest topic right now in women's basketball on the internet. We probably need to discuss. And I'm going to bring this topic into the conversation by saying this first. I do not believe we have even surpassed the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the exposés, the biographies, the realistic fiction that could come about because of the CaitlinClark effect and CaitlinClark's rise and what it has done for the profile of women's basketball, both professionally and at the amateur level. And so I say all that to say there are 2 such books that are, one of them is already out, and I'm excited to hear because you have finished our friend Howard Megdal's wonderful biography of CaitlinClark that has already been released. Mitch has already finished it. It's next on my to-do list of books to read. Shout out to my Kindle. And then ChristineBrennan, perennial, longtime national sports columnist, and her involvement in the W, stemming back to last September, has been rather fascinating, especially, Mitch, as someone like myself, who I do want to note, I have corresponded with Christine before. I heard her speak when I was a young pup and have always respected her work and do respect her. But this has become another lightning rod in the CaitlinClark saga and has once again become the talking point, not just in the women's basketball space, but in the sports media landscape at large.
I'm going to be pretty long-winded here.
Okay. I'm gonna get my water bottle and I'm gonna put my feet up, and I know the listeners are as well.
Okay. I have several things to say about Christine Brennan's book and Christine Brennan's overall coverage of the WNBA and CaitlinClark dating back to last year. I have respect for Christine Brennan in regards to what she has done in her career up to this point, how she broke barriers for women in sports journalism and all that she has covered. She is an accomplished sports writer. Having said that, I find it extremely weird, and I've said as much to many of my colleagues who are in the women's sports media space, that she has made this hard pivot in her career to being the person that is CaitlinClark's chief defender, and also someone who, quite frankly, is further pushing two narratives that are not true, and I think harmful to how women's basketball is perceived. The first is the notion that other players in the WNBA are jealous of CaitlinClark, and because of that, they were being overtly physical with her, or they are being, quote, petty towards her, as I saw Dick Vitale say on Twitter last week in regards to players not voting her as one of the top choices to the All-Star team. A quick aside.
Shout out Dickie V. We do love you, Dickie V. He got another positive cancer screen, or no cancer screening today. Shout out Dickie V. We love you guys. We just have questions about your understanding of the greater picture at play here.
Yeah. Shout out to Dick Vitale, but I've never seen him talk about women's basketball ever. And CaitlinClark has missed 9 of the Fever's 18 games this season. And the fact is that there were players who were more healthy, more consistent, and more deserving of those votes in this specific sampling of 18 games. Back to ChristineBrennan. Aside from that incident with Kennedy Carter, I don't think Caitlin has been a victim of any cheap shots or contact that were not basketball plays. The times that she's gotten poked in the eyes, those happened while a defender was defending her the right way. You could maybe make the case for the Marina Mabry thing being over the line. But again, like, CaitlinClark has never been punched or suplexed or actually been injured by any one of these moments.
She did get decked once by Stewie on a screen, but again, it was a basketball play, and Caitlin immediately in the postgame said, it's a basketball play.
Yeah. I think Paige Beckers recently got decked by an Alyssa Thomas screen, and didn't hear anybody cry about that.
No, Natasha Howard got decked, 6'5", 6'6", whatever her frame is. And she was like, I'm getting too old for this, or whatever her quote was from over the weekend. It happens. It's a basketball play.
Yeah. So I also just hate that, like, we, not you and I, but people in this space are using this words like jealousy and pettiness so much when we talk about women's basketball. I've actually listened to a couple of the interviews that ChristineBrennan has done for this book, and she uses the word jealousy quite often. My thing is, like, if players don't like CaitlinClark, that should be okay. That's competitiveness. That's sports. The WNBA players do not need to appreciate CaitlinClark and treat her with kid gloves. We had guys who hated Michael Jordan, who hated Tiger Woods, who hated Dale Earnhardt, who hated Larry Bird and Magic Johnson.
Who hate LeBron currently.
We never collectively, as a sports watching community, demanded that these guys be universally appreciated. And people like Dick Vitale and ChristineBrennan need to treat women's basketball like an actual sport and stop being so damn patronizing about it. The second thing that Brennan, I think, is perpetuating is this false idea that Black people hate or resent, or, let's use the buzzword again, are jealous of CaitlinClark. There's no real proof of that. And the way that she talks about that in sort of these dog whistle phrases, and how she often references how Caitlin is a white player in a league that is 74% Black. I don't want to straight up call her a right-wing grifter, but her willingly going on an Outkick podcast, a news organization that we have talked about on this podcast before, to promote her book kind of tells me everything I need to know about it.
Or at the very least, who the target audience of the book is, which
Indeed.
is the mainstream. Not to say that the mainstream is right-wing, but it's those who have come to watch women's basketball largely because of CaitlinClark, and because that is the only real player in their purview, which is unfortunate, because I think that there is a large portion of the mainstream that has come to the W in the last 2 years and has been exposed to other great players and has now found a way to identify with those players and root for those players just as much as Caitlin. But because the mainstream just knows CaitlinClark, that's why she goes to where perhaps the generalized surface level reporting, or not even reporting, retelling of what occurred in the W last night is actually taking place.
Yeah. And so, like, that brings me to the whole exchange that she had between, with her and Dejanay Carrington that blew up last season and has resurfaced this week following this book excerpt that was published at CNN that reads like a 3,000-word Yelp review of a restaurant that Christine Brennan didn't like. Christine Brennan wants to act like her questions of Dejanay existed in this vacuum, like she was asking a pitcher about why he beaned a batter. But anyone who watches that video that Christine Brennan recorded and posted, by the way, of that interaction between the two of them can tell that she's intentionally trying to poke the bear and provoke and get a reaction. And I think anyone that saw the video of Dejanay's inadvertent eye poke of CaitlinClark could tell that that was not intentional. And Christine Brennan talks about all the time about how she would have asked these same questions in NFL locker rooms in 1984. Well, this isn't 1984 anymore. And I find it also hard to believe someone who says that she's covered many Olympics, that she doesn't know what the Carmelo Anthony 3 to the dome celebration is, that's been around for like 15 years. And if she truly didn't, then it kind of shows how out of touch she is. And maybe she wasn't the right person to write a CaitlinClark book at this moment in time.
There have also, and I don't know if you can confirm this, Mitch, but I know people have asked me, and from what I have seen, I don't know if Caitlin, outside of media availabilities, actually gave a one-on-one to Christine.
She did not. I think
she did to Howard, though. To Howard, she did give multiple one-on-ones.
The whole way I think that Christine Brennan framed her questions to Dejanay and everything sort of that she has said and done since then, I think has just further cemented her place as the person who is always going to cape up for CaitlinClark and the person who is always going to say that the league was and still is unprepared to deal with a white star of her magnitude, and the person who is, perhaps not directly, but clearly implying that Black fans and players are against CaitlinClark. And I think in this media space that we live in now in 2025, sadly, there is a market for that person and that voice. And again, like, she went on Outkick. And I'm sure that if she didn't have a relationship with CNN, she might be on Fox News talking about this book as well, if she hasn't been already. I don't know.
I just want to know, like, how has no one said to her, like, you gotta read the room? Like,
yeah, like, are you sure about this?
Like, don't get me wrong.
Sure?
Like
Yeah.
I understand as someone who my primary beat is the NFL, and while I've covered women's college basketball since 2015, I did not really dive into the W until the last 2-3 years. I will openly say that, and I would also like to note that that's part of why I love working with Mitch each week on this podcast, because I learn. I've reached out, as some of the listeners of this pod who work professionally in the bigwigs of the national media know, I've reached out to many of you because I want to learn more.
Mhm.
And for someone who has been regarded as one of the journalists of our time to basically rest on the laurels of I covered 6 Olympics, and so therefore I can cover women's basketball.
Yeah.
That's a little disappointing as someone who idolized that person. And I would like to think, even as you are in the glory days of your career and you are regarded as one of those perennial voices in all of sports, that you still would take the time to learn the landscape. I will admit, like I said, I know I butcher names of NFL players too. Like, try to get me to say Ndamukong Suh on the radio, and like, it's a 50-50 chance I pronounce it right. And that's not because I don't know his name. It's just because I can't pronounce things. But point being, like, if you're going to come into the space, you should respect the people that are there. And I'm not talking about, privilege, or I'm just saying in general, like, if you're a plumber, right? Or you want to become a plumber, but you've been a carpenter your whole life, you should probably go talk to other plumbers. Like, just reading the manual is not enough. You should probably go talk to other plumbers and get their take on things. And that's what's most disappointing for me. And ultimately, at some point in time, you have to read the room. Like, how can you not acknowledge that clearly there is a portion of the fan base in terms of women's basketball coverage who would not feel so great about you going with certain outlets and having those conversations in a live public format, unless you have said, I don't even care about those fans. They're not going to read the book anyways.
Yeah, I just, the women's basketball media space is a different media space than the NFL or the NBA or whatever. To your point, Christine Brennan likes to talk about her resume all the time. And I would just like to point out, I've covered the WNBA and women's college basketball For about 8 years now. I've covered every Final Four since 2019. I've never seen ChristineBrennan at a Final Four or a Sweet 16 or any college game. I haven't seen her at the handful of WNBA playoff games that I covered in 2018 and since then. I know she was with the Fever for a lot, last year, writing and reporting on this book. But before that, she wasn't really in these spaces. And to me, like, that's just further evidence that she isn't really familiar with the current players and culture of today's game. And she doesn't really care about telling the stories about the players and the coaches in today's game. She parachuted into the WNBA in 2024 because she saw an opportunity to make some money on writing a book about CaitlinClark, and saw an opportunity to defend the person, to be the person that defends her and positions CaitlinClark as the WNBA's great white savior. About the book specifically, I haven't read it. I'm not totally sure that I will read it. I did read the excerpt at CNN. I find it telling that in the only excerpt, I can't say that word, excerpt of the book.
It's because of me. It's because of Indomitian Sue. It's rubbed off on you. That's on me.
Yeah. I find it telling that in the only sampling of this book that we've gotten so far, the one that was published at CNN, it's not really about CaitlinClark at all. It's about framing Dejanay Carrington and Melissa Smith and DeWanna Bonner as villains and bullies, quite frankly. And apparently what they did and said to ChristineBrennan, it's really just Brennan's first-person account of all that happened last October after the inadvertent eye poke and her questions of Dejanay. I think it's telling that in writing that chapter, Brennan includes a few short and precise barbs thrown at her way by people like Megan Rapinoe and Lindsay Gibbs, both of whom I respect a whole lot, and then has these long defenses of her by people like Jake Tapper. I read the AP's review of the book, and I think it backs up everything that we're saying here. So this is, quote, Clark's race and the frosty reception she got from some in the league is returned to again and again, with Brennan and the people she talked to asserting with incredulity that the WNBA wasn't ready for all the attention. I also think it's telling, like you mentioned, that CaitlinClark did not grant ChristineBrennan a one-on-one interview for this book. And from what I've been told, nobody particularly close to Caitlin granted her an exclusive interview either. Now, she was at press conferences and scrums and things like that, but not a deep one-on-one conversation. Just to go back to that AP review, it continues, quote, it speaks to the divisive us versus them moment in the world that the world finds itself in, but fans looking for tidbits about Clark that are not already part of the public record, how she learned to shoot, her on and off court life. We'll have to stay tuned to the current WNBA season. So the AP review tells me that there isn't really much in this book that is revealing
she didn't talk to anyone
in terms of CaitlinClark. And if the book is anything like this excerpt, it's just going to be a book full of ChristineBrennan complaining about how she's been treated and how she perceives Caitlin to be by the WNBA, its players, and the media.
I shouldn't say she didn't talk to anyone, because clearly she was in scrums and she did interview people. So we'll put that out there. And
yeah,
I would also just like to, before I give Mitch the final word on this week's main event, I would just like to say hello to Chloe Peterson of the Indy Star and Scott Agnes of the Fieldhouse Files, who both do a great job. And I just would like to we appreciate both of you.
Yeah, shout out to them.
Who may unfortunately have gotten caught in the crossfires of all this. So I would just like to say thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chloe. We appreciate your coverage. Go Hawks.
I value like people who have been in these spaces, like their opinions a whole lot. And so when I hear someone like Cheryl Reeve, the coach of the Minnesota Lynx, say that, quote, there are people who have not followed the WNBA that are now following because of CaitlinClark, and ChristineBrennan is one of them. I take that into account quite a lot. She also called Brennan,
because she was the coach of TeamUSA, a team that ChristineBrennan covered.
Right. She also called Brennan opportunistic and said what she wrote is fiction, and then also said she likes to have a villain in her storytelling, unquote. I do want to say that I have just finished Howard Megdal's book, Becoming CaitlinClark, which I think is excellent and fantastic and deeply reported. And I will just preface this by saying that Howard is someone who I consider to be a friend and a mentor. So if folks want to take this with a grain of salt, that's fine. But Howard is someone who has covered the WNBA and women's college basketball for many, many years. He's been in these spaces. He cares about the sport, about growing it, about improving the storytelling around it. And I think he's earned the trust of a lot of important players and coaches. One example, Lisa Bluter wrote the foreword for his book. Another, Jan Jensen gave Howard her grandmother's diaries. Another, C. Vivian Stringer invited Howard into her home for a long interview. My takeaway from Howard's book is I think what it does is it tells us the how and the why of CaitlinClark, and it properly contextualizes all the things that made her meteoric rise possible. You know, ESPN wasn't even broadcasting every game of the women's NCAA tournament until 2019. The NCAA wasn't allowing for March Madness iconography to be used by women until 2022. Yep. The WNBA didn't start advertising during the NCAA tournament until 2024. The WNBA, just before CaitlinClark arrived in the league, got its best television contract ever. NIL was happening in women's college basketball while she was at Iowa. So you had a player appearing in ads during the NCAA tournament that she was in, further familiarizing the fan base and, you know, diehard fans and casual fans. And, you know, like that could have happened if they had NIL at this time with Diana Taurasi or Candace Parker or Maya Moore or Brittany Griner, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, on and on and on. All those players that were very popular and selling out arenas and all those things. I think Howard's book does a really great job in contextualizing how women's basketball was being mismanaged and neglected by sort of the most powerful institutions involved in it before CaitlinClark came about, and how she was kind of the catalyst for this perfect storm in terms of amplifying the audience and the viewership and pushing the sport into the mainstream. And the way her arrival coincided with rebranding the NCAA tournament, ESPN showing more games, and the arrival of Kathy Engelbert as commish. Like, all this stuff just happened in the last 6-7 years. It wasn't that Caitlin snapped her fingers and all this changed, which is, I think, what ChristineBrennan and a lot of folks seem to imply all the time. This wasn't a big bang. It was a long road of stops and starts in terms of momentum building, and we had been building towards this moments like the 2023 Final Four and the 2024 Final Four for a while. And I also think that Angel Reese's role in all that is not insignificant either, and she gets overlooked far too often for her role when we talk about that boom for the sport.
Right.
I think the other thing that Howard's book does is it really tells the importance and the history of women's basketball in Iowa.
Yay, I was going to end with that. Thank you, Mitch.
I know you know very well. And like how if CaitlinClark had been born in another state or gone to another school,
if she'd gone to Notre Dame like she initially intended to,
she may not become what she has become. There were a lot of states that Howard writes about very, very well and detailed that banned women's basketball in the mid-1900s. And Iowa was one of the few that didn't, which allowed, I think, for the culture around the 6-on-6 game that they had to grow. And, you know, that grew and ingrained certain elements of that game, like pace and space, into girls across the state. And it just kept growing. And then when Vivian Stringer comes to Iowa in the 80s and pledges to fill Carver Hawkeye Arena and then does it, that leads to what you see around Iowa now, I think. So I highly recommend Howard's book. I can't say the same for the other one.
I, again, will just note that while I have not covered the professional space, I have specifically covered the University of Iowa since 2015 and the women's basketball program. And more importantly for this conversation that we can end on, and then we'll get to making money with Mitch, because I know we want to get to picks for this week, the high school world of sports in Iowa, which what you have to remember for those of you listening in a city or a state where you have a professional sports team, there are no professional sports teams in the state of Iowa. Their high school teams are their college teams, and their college teams are their pro teams, and they love sports there. What is also important to note, and I hear Lisa in my head right now, Lisa Bluter, because she was the one who took me aside and really gave me the backstory of the history with Dr. Christine Grant. And this idea of not just at the University of Iowa was there an athletic director for both the women's sports and then the men's sports, but in the state of Iowa to this day, and trust me, because I covered it, It is one of, I believe, only two, and I think it now may be the only one in the union that there is a separate high school union for the boys and the girls. You have the IHSAA, which oversees the boys' sports, and you have the IGHSAU that oversees the girls' sports. It is rare to see in 2025. But a positive byproduct has been that is the idea of the Iowa girl. And the branding is everywhere from the time that they are in middle school through the high school state championships. The idea of the Iowa girl is promoted. And that is why, to Howard's point, if CaitlinClark grew up in New Jersey, I don't know. And trust me, I'm from the state of New Jersey. Marina Mabry and her sisters were playing down the street from me.
Animal Doggo and Michaela Blake's.
Shout out Olivia Miles and all of my New Jersey brethren, but I don't know if it has the effect colloquially, and I say that in an endearing and loving way. Like, I don't know if at the grassroots level it has the effect in New Jersey that it did in Iowa, and in turn spread throughout the country. So yes, I have only listened to the interviews that Howard has graciously done with Richard Deitch and a couple of others so far promoting the book, but I'm very, very excited to read it. And thank you, producer Dimitri, because this was a great main event. Okay, Mitch, it's time to make picks, and I have some bad news. I went 2-1. I went 2-1 with our friend Rebecca Kopelman 2 weeks ago, and I went 0-3 last week. But when you look at the picks that I made, like, maybe you'll forgive me. Again, I picked the Lynx to win the Commissioner's Cup. The Dream lost by 1. They were a 1.5-point favorite at home over the Storm. I picked the Mystics, who, by the way, were leading the Lynx most of the first half last Thursday night. I had them covering an 11.5-point spread. That did not happen. Hopefully you have some better luck this week.
Yeah, we're going to go back to the Mystics and see if they can turn things around for us.
We love the Mystics on this podcast. Kevin last week was like, not as in on the hype train as we were. Shout out to Kevin Schwartz.
Yeah, this is Thursday night. This is on Amazon Prime, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be at this game. It's at George Mason in Fairfax, Virginia. Las Vegas Aces at the Washington Mystics. I'm going to take the Mystics at plus 1.5. I like the Mystics to get a home victory here against a Aces squad that, as we just talked about, is very out of sorts and maybe not playing its best basketball right now. And the Mystics may be riding a little bit high after their 2 prized rookies made the All-Star team.
And maybe Brittany Sykes has something to say about it too. I
Indeed.
don't know.
Perhaps.
That's what I would like to see. That's our first pick of the week. Let's go to Saturday and the aforementioned Minnesota Lynx.
Yeah, I think the Lynx keep on rolling here. This is 1 p.m. Eastern on ABC there at the Chicago Sky. I'm going to take the Lynx at minus 8.5. I know that's kind of a lot of points, but I just don't think the Sky are very good. Maybe on a future podcast episode, we might have to have a conversation about Haley Van Lith and if she is actually a WNBA player.
And also, what is the Chicago Sky? Because last week Kevin is a Sky fan, and so at that point, they were starting to maybe put some things together. And the idea that we discussed on last week's episode of no Camila Cardoso, how does that open up space for the rest of that lineup? Camila Cardoso will be back for this game. Do you have Angel Reese now in a role where you're not trying to fit 2 forwards in the paint together at all moments of action, both offensively and defensively? I don't know. They're still an enigma to me.
I will say I support the Angel Reese point forward.
Yep, and that's what we talked about last
experiment.
week. Yep.
I think that is a good thing for the Sky to figure out if that actually works. My last pick here, this is Sunday. This is also 1 p.m. Eastern on ABC. I got the Wings at the Fever. Maybe we will finally get the Paige Beckers CaitlinClark matchup because Caitlin missed the first game, but maybe she'll be back for this one. Either way, the Fever won that first game without CaitlinClark down in Dallas. So I'm going to take the Fever at minus 6.5 to win this second matchup with the Dallas Wings and Paige Beckers. I will say that I like how the Dallas Wings are playing, especially when they lean into the youth movement of Isaiah James and JJ Quinterly and some of those other pieces down there. And Dallas, it's time. It's time to trade Arike Ogunbowale.
Yeah. We discussed it all weekend in Indianapolis. Yeah. I do appreciate, not maybe everyone doesn't hate Chris, that being Chris Koklanis, the head coach of the Dallas Wings, as we've once upon a time suggested, because I will give Dallas this. They've tried to bring in different pieces to that front court. They shipped Nalissa Smith out of town. They bring Lee in from Seattle. Like they're trying.
It might also be time for them to cut bait with Dejanay Carrington too. Like I don't know if she exactly works there either. And
both with the system and also with Chris K.
I think mostly maybe more with Chris K, but certainly also the system. Like she just hasn't really been effective there.
Yeah.
And I think it was just like, oh, she was really good on the Sun, so we'll bring her and we'll bring Nalissa here and we'll have both of them in the front court and it'll be great. And it just hasn't worked out. And Dallas, you're not going to the playoffs this year. Like I would just see if you can get a pick for her or, another young player or whatever and just try to figure it out.
I just want to know if any other podcast calls him Chris K the way that we do. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud that we have developed characters on the Women's Basketball Podcast. In case you missed it, here are Mitch's picks. He's got the Mystics plus 1.5 home against the Aces Thursday night. The Minnesota Lynx minus 8.5 on the road at the Chicago Sky, and at home, the Indiana Fever, where every game is a home game. Well, they're in Indiana, Mia. Of course, it's a home game. A 6.5 point favorite over the Dallas Wings Sunday, 1 p.m. on ABC. Mitch is taking the Indiana Fever. It is time for last call, but let's first start with the topic that we actually didn't get a chance to get to a little bit earlier. And it is one that we are very excited for producer Dimitri's piece that's coming out, Barrett Sports Media, tomorrow, regarding the feud. Yes, there's still more beef, folks. I don't know how we can possibly manage all of this angst in one podcast episode, but here we are. Kirk Herbstreit is mad that Elle Duncan wears her Georgia red and black and red. I'm sorry, Georgia fans. I forget which order you like to say it in because you change Florida, Georgia every year. LOL. He's very upset that she wants to promote the fact that she's a Georgia fan, when in fact Kirk Herbstreit promotes, or rather tries to hide, his affinity for a certain school that plays in a horseshoe. What say you, Mitch?
This is just a very 2004 take to me. Like when Bill Simmons is just getting famous and stuff, with his column. I just kind of think the cat's out of the bag, toothpaste out of the tube, kind of with this stuff. I mean, there are so many people that work at ESPN that are on TV where we know their sports allegiances, and it's no secret. And I don't think it really harms the product, including on the show that Herbstreit is on. Is there a bigger Michigan fan at ESPN than Desmond Howard?
I mean, is there a bigger West Virginia fan than Pat McAfee?
Right. I mean, I think he's a booster for them, right? Is he not donated to their NIL collective or something?
Yes. Yeah.
We all know that Reese Davis went to Alabama. I just Scott Van Pelt has his Maryland affinity.
Literally was with Buzz Williams yesterday. Just let it out, man.
Yeah, this was very weird to me. I don't really understand why Kirk is trying to fight this battle. Also, yeah, we all know that he's kind of an Ohio State homer. What are we doing here? This is kind of weird. This is super weird to me.
Just go walk the golden retrievers, Kirk, please. I need more Instagrams of the dogs. Just focus on that.
I would just encourage our listeners. Producer Dimitri is writing about this at Barrett Sports Media, so go check that out.
Yeah, please go check out his piece at Barrett Sports Media on Tuesday. So it'll be out when this podcast debuts later in the week. Justice for Azurá Stevens. I was thoroughly impressed with the ability to step out, stretch the floor. I knew she obviously could shoot the three, but she made 3 of them, I believe, in the win over the Indiana Fever last Saturday. Presence in the post, defensive presence, definitely a spark, LOL for the Sparks. Doesn't get nearly enough publicity in my estimation, Mitch, because she is now playing alongside Kelsey Plum and Rakia Jackson. I was surprised she did not make the All-Star game, but when push comes to shove and you consider those high-profile players she plays with, oh, by the way, Cam Brink's not even back yet, it's not a surprise to me that perhaps not enough people are talking about her, so we will here on this podcast.
Indeed.
So shout out to Azure Stevens. I would also like to quickly note to the Aaliyah Edwards. Will she be traded? Will she not be traded? Was rather fascinating last week, especially in the context of the notion that she could be traded to Dallas. We were just literally talking 3 minutes ago about how Dallas should be leaning into their 3 rookies and the youth movement. And while Aaliyah Edwards is still a young player, I would expect her to command a first-round pick. And I don't think Dallas can be parting with that. So do you think Aaliyah Edwards is actually on the move, and where could potentially she land?
So I think that the Mystics should try to trade Aaliyah Edwards if they can get the right value for her. You don't want to undersell her. I think she is a valuable asset in terms of like she's 1 year into the league. She proved last year. I think she was on the all-rookie team last year. Mm-hmm. She can play in this league. However, I would just say that in terms of the Mystics, like it's clear that Kiki Iriafen is ahead of her, and it seems like they are going in that direction, and they have settled on Kiki Iriafen at the 4. And unfortunately, like Aaliyah Edwards doesn't really play any other position. Like she's too small to be a center, and she's not mobile enough to play on the wing. So if Aaliyah Edwards is okay coming off the bench, then sure, like you keep her or whatever. But I think if you can trade her and you can get a first-round pick for her, like, do it. I would do it. If you're the Dallas Wings, I don't know that you would give up a first round pick for her. I think what the Mystics maybe were hoping for was the Aces not to trade for NaLyssa Smith and maybe trade for Aaliyah Edwards. I think is probably what they wanted to happen. Like I don't know what the market for Aaliyah Edwards is right now. I don't know if there's a team out there that needs a really good 4, a really good power forward, a young power forward. We'll see.
Yeah, that is my final bullet point. There we go. And Ndamukong Suh. In our news and notes section, NaLyssa Smith commands a first-round pick. I never thought I'd see the day. And then I saw her actually play in her homecoming to Indiana. And while, yes, she was thrust into a very difficult situation, had never played a full game with this Aces roster, and was expected to contribute meaningful minutes, fouls out of the game. Ultimately, I just think that, to your point earlier, of Kia Stokes is not giving Becky Hammon anything offensively, and they just need someone at the center position that's going to contribute on the offensive side of the floor. But I don't even know if NaLyssa Smith does that, because that's part of why she was jettisoned away by the aforementioned Indiana Fever.
Yeah, I think it was smart for the Wings to trade NaLyssa Smith. Like, if you could, it was clear that like it wasn't really working there in Dallas, and if you can get a pick for her, you do it. But I don't think she fixes the Aces problems, certainly.
Not at all. You have anything before we get out of here, out of a extra long edition of the Women's Basketball Podcast, Mitch?
I do not. You can read me at SB Nation's Breakaway, where I wrote about Michaela Blake's balling out in the AmeriCup earlier today. And last week I wrote about Killa Kim's new contract and the Khamil Pierre situation. But yeah, nothing crazy to plug this week.
And how tall is Cooper Flagg in person?
I don't know. Maybe he's 6'7"?
I didn't know, because you were on NBA draft coverage last week. Yes.
Oh, no. So what I did was I went to this basically NBA draft party that Vox Media was throwing, and I took photos and videos of like the sponsorships and people interacting with said sponsorships. So Cooper Flagg was not there, but I did meet Greg Oden.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a bucket list item right there.
He is very tall, and he is a very large human being. And he is all of like 7'2", probably. Our brief interaction was I took a picture of him when he walked in, and then later we happened to be standing next to each other at the bar, and he asked me how the past appetizers were, and I told him he should eat the chicken dumplings. I don't know if he actually followed my advice, but that was my interaction with Mr. Greg Oden.
Shout out, Greg. You are officially a friend and a character on the Women's Basketball Podcast. You're welcome anytime. You're welcome anytime to hop on with Mitch and myself. He is Mitch. I am Mia, saying we will catch you next week.
Deuces.